My name is Sarah, and I'm 30 years old. I have a 10-year-old son named Jake from my first marriage, which didn't work out. Currently, I'm married to John, who is 38 years old, and together we have a 1-year-old baby. We live in a small town where life is simple but sometimes challenging. My journey with John began 6 years ago when I was 24 and he was 32. John and I met through phone calls, which started unexpectedly but quickly became a significant part of my life. We talked for weeks before meeting in person, and I remember how nervous but excited I felt before that first meeting. When we finally met, everything clicked. He was charming, kind, and had a calming presence. We started dating right away, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like life was giving me another chance at happiness. At that time, John had never been married or had children, which was different from my experience. I came into the relationship with emotional baggage and a young son, but John embraced both of us warmly. He made me feel like my past didn't define me, and that was something I deeply appreciated. As our relationship grew, John began to open up about his past. He told me about a previous girlfriend he had lived with for 4 years. They never married, and according to him, he was the one who ended the relationship. What stood out to me more, however, was the story of his first love. He told me about a girl he had loved deeply when he was only 16 or 17. They had a beautiful connection. But when he left to join the army, she didn't wait for him. She moved on with her life, leaving him heartbroken. Even years later, John admitted that losing her had been one of the hardest experiences of his life. His mother also shared stories about this girl, and it was clear from the way she spoke that John's feelings for her had left a lasting impression. While I appreciated his honesty, it made me feel uneasy. It was like there was a part of him still stuck in the past, holding on to someone who wasn't part of his present. I tried not to think too much about it, convincing myself that his love for her was something he had left behind. One day, John invited me and Jake to visit his apartment. I was excited because it felt like a big step forward in our relationship. However, when I arrived, I was shocked. The apartment was old and run down, with furniture that looked like it hadn't been replaced in decades. It was clear that the place needed serious work. I asked John why his apartment was in such a state, especially since he had a stable job. He brushed off the question, saying he had lived with his parents for many years and hadn't had the time to fix the place up. Later, I learned from his mother that John had spent years hanging out with friends, drinking beer in the park, and living a carefree life. She mentioned that he often brought different women to his apartment, but those relationships never lasted more than a night. This revelation surprised me. It was hard to reconcile the responsible, kind man I knew with the image of someone who seemed so reckless in the past. What unsettled me even more was discovering that John still kept a card from his first girlfriend, the one he loved when he was a teenager. She had given it to him before he left for the army, and he had kept it all these years as a memory. I didn't say anything to him about it, but it stayed on my mind. Then, one New Year's Eve, John and I decided to go to the city centre to see the holiday lights. We wanted to enjoy the festive atmosphere and create new memories as a family. When we arrived, everything seemed perfect at first. But then I noticed John acting strangely. He stopped walking with me and Jake and stood by himself, staring at something or someone. Following his gaze, I saw a woman standing nearby with her husband. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her at first. Then it hit me. She was his first love. I watched as John stood there, completely focused on her. He didn't say anything to me, but his expression said it all. He looked sad, almost lost in another time. That moment changed everything for me. I felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, sadness, and even jealousy. Why was he so affected by seeing her? Did he still have feelings for her? I tried to brush it off, but the doubts began to creep in. Later that night, I asked him about it. "Do you still love her?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He got defensive, telling me I was imagining things and that I wasn't thinking clearly. But his reaction only made me more suspicious. Over time, I noticed other signs. John would occasionally ask about her life, even reaching out to her brother to find out where she worked or what she was doing. It hurt to see him so interested in someone who wasn't part of our life together. Even his mother talked about her sometimes, reminiscing about how much John had loved her. Every time she mentioned it, I felt like I didn't matter as much. It was like I was competing with a memory, and no matter what I did, I couldn't win. As the months went by, John started to act more distant. He stopped talking to me as much and rarely smiled. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was thinking about her, even if he wouldn't admit it. I tried to bring it up again, asking him directly if he still loved her. But he dismissed me, saying I was overthinking. Still, the doubts remained. I started to question everything, our relationship, his feelings for me, and whether I was truly enough for him. I loved John, but it felt like I was living in the shadow of his first love. No matter how much I tried to focus on our future, it seemed like he was always looking back. After a lot of sleepless nights and deep reflection, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly wondering where his heart truly lay. One evening, I sat him down and asked him point blank, "Do you want to stay with me, or do you still want her?" He looked surprised, maybe even a little hurt. "What are you talking about?" he said. "I love you." But by then, his words didn't hold the same weight. Actions speak louder than words, and his actions had shown me that a part of him was still tied to the past. I told him I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to be with someone who loved me fully, without any reservations or lingering attachments. Leaving him was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also necessary. I realized I deserved to be with someone who made me feel like I was their first and only choice. Living in the shadow of his first love was no way to build a life. In the end, walking away gave me the clarity and freedom I needed to rebuild my life. I hope John finds the peace he needs. And I know I'll find happiness too, free from the weight of a love that never truly belonged to me.